Um, Hi, everyone. I'm Zach Price, a faculty here in the School of Writing, Literature, and Film. And before we start, I want to thank Erin Sneller and Sarah Miller for their help setting up this event. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Scott Burns, who I'm sure many of you already know. Scott was the writer for the Bourne Ultimatum. He has the distinction of being a close collaborator with Steven Soderbergh and has written a range of films with him, including The Informant, Contagion, which we'll talk a lot about in this conversation, Side Effects, and most recently, The Laundromat. In the world of documentary, he is also a producer for An Inconvenient Truth and its sequel. And he is the director of the film Pew 239 with a young Oscar Isaac and Patty Considine. And most recently, he directed the film The Report about the Senate investigation into CIA torture of detainees. And I saw that movie this week in preparation for the conversation. And I really wish I saw it earlier because I think it's great. So I highly recommend everyone watching tonight to go see that movie if you haven't already.
Thank you.
And maybe I want to highlight a few more things. So Scott worked in advertisement and commercials for a while, and I believe he momentarily worked in journalism, which I think both kind of come across in his work, and I hope to circle back to those with some questions later on. And finally, Scott has been really generous since COVID hit in terms of getting the word out about kind of science-backed information. He helped organize the cast of Contagion to give public health announcements from their homes about social distancing and hand washing or the science behind vaccines. He's been on talk shows and news stations to discuss contagion and how to think about public health communication going into the future. So all this to say, thank you, Scott, for joining us here virtually at OSU.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And now I'm going to kick it off to Andrea Schuster, who's an MA student here in the School of Writing, Literature, and Film, to start off the conversation.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here. I wanted to dive right into Contagion because it is so appropriate right now. I have a general question about how you choose projects, what the next steps are in terms of the stories you want to tell. I also had a question that was submitted from another student saying, "Are you a little bit clairvoyant?" And so if you could talk a little bit about that, what sparked the initial research for Contagion?
It's become a very bittersweet story for me. When I finished doing The Informant with Steven Soderbergh, we were driving away from our last day on set, and we'd had a really great experience, and it was a fun movie to make. And he said, "So what are you doing next?" And I said, I'm not really sure, but I'd like to do a movie about a global pandemic, but I'd like it to be really science-based. And the idea of that came from my father in a lot of ways. He and I used to sit around the kitchen table, and he would find stories buried deep in the newspaper about, usually at that time, bird flu, and how like bird flu was eventually going to jump into the human population. And that, it had gone from bird to human, but not from human to human. But eventually it would begin to be able to go from human to human. And it had always struck me that no one had really revisited this issue since that Dustin Hoffman movie Outbreak, I think in the 80s or 90s. And I always had a problem with that movie because the science was a little bit shabby. And so I said to Stephen, I want to do it, but I want to do it really, really factually, and do the work, do the science, and because my understanding at that point about the way viruses work was they were scarier than what people could make up.
So speaking of the rigor of the science that's involved in the script, how do you approach writing a script like that in terms of balancing the dense amounts of information that, to do it justice with the entertainment and the drama of the story?
That's a really good question. And it's one that Stephen and I sort of have tinkered with over the years, both in Contagion, but also more recently in The Laundromat. And my feeling is that I have to understand, as much as I can And I like science, and so I enjoy that part of doing the research. And as Zach pointed out, like I come from a journalist background. Both my parents were psychologists, which you can draw your own conclusions about what that did to me. But I appreciate science, and I think, you know, it's it's the way in which I choose to interpret a lot of the world. So, you know, for me, it's like I want to understand as much as I can. But in college, you know, I was a horrible note taker. I'm going to apologize for that little beeping. I forgot to turn off my notifications, and I don't want to go screw everything up. So I hope you guys can deal with that. Um, so I was a bad note taker, but the great thing about my job now is I only have to remember the interesting parts. And so when I talk to a scientist like, you know, Ian Lipkin at Columbia University in New York, who's an amazing virologist, or Larry Brilliant, or Laurie Garrett, I sort of, my ability to retain is really kind of limited to what I think makes an interesting movie scene. And so that, you know, in a sense, my inadequacy as a student facilitates my ability as an entertainer.
So the sources that you reached out to for the research on Contagion, did you find them generous with their time? Is this something that they, you know, felt needed better representation as well?
Yeah, you know, in most of the films that I've worked on, I've been very, very fortunate to find people who understand the power of popular culture and the power of movies and of storytelling. And that's usually the space in which I try and meet them. You know, with Dr. Lipkin, who is as good a virologist as there is on the planet, you know, his deal with me from the very first day was, if you want me to make this Hollywood, I'm not in. But if you'll really, really honor the science, then, oh, that's my dog, everybody. Then, you know, like, then I'll work with you. And the same was true of Laurie Garrett. And a lot of times there's a lot of skepticism. You know, Hollywood is notorious for playing fast and furious with science and with facts. And so a lot of times you have to really work to earn the trust of your experts. I think for me, you know, I didn't really understand public health until I started doing my research, 10, like 12 years ago, I guess now. You know, I used to think when I got on a plane, when someone was wearing a mask, it was because, you know, like they were scared and they didn't want to get sick. And I looked at them like, I'm fine. Why are you wearing a mask? And now I recognize that frequently those people come from cultures where they don't want to risk getting me sick. And that a mask in those situations is part of a really beautiful social contract that we're going to take care of each other when we're in shared spaces, which makes the fact that it has become politicized so horrible and so profoundly depressing to me, that I think in a different version of our experience of this country, you know, we would have just thought, oh, yeah, it's common sense. We know from the science that if everybody wore a mask, you know, we would not have lost this many lives. And to encounter in my community, and I'm sure where you guys live, you have the same thing, people of any age who can't be bothered to put on a mask and save a life is mind-blowing to me, that that's where the leadership of this country, you know, pointed us a year ago. And, you know, it's infuriating.
Another one of the questions that was submitted to me, just based on what you said, looking back 10 years later in the situation we're now in, if you were to make this film again, what, I'll just leave it there. How would you do it differently?
Well, coming off what I just said, you know, I never thought in a million years after doing my research that I would ever live in a country where our bipartisan politics would become so powerful that we would ignore science. I just didn't believe that that could happen. I didn't believe that common sense, medical knowledge, information was something that could be ignored by our leaders, something, now we're learning was suppressed by the Trump administration. If I had walked into Warner Brothers and said, so they finally figure out what the virus is, but then the president of the United States lies about it and doesn't enact any of the public policy. And again, like, I always am afraid at this point in the conversation that people are going to go, oh, he's just like some full of shit liberal. And I may be that, but this is not about that. This should have never been political. And I always want to say to people, it would have been better. And I really believe today that Donald Trump would still be president if he had said, everybody put on a mask and we can flatten the curve in a month and we'll be saving the economy in the long run billions and billions of dollars, and we won't lose 500,000 people or 400,000 people. Let's remember, he at one point, and the CDC said, it could have been as low as 80. We could have lost only 80,000 people if we had worn masks and created an effective national policy. So to answer your question, I don't think I ever would have anticipated that. This is sort of an interesting thing. When we finished the movie 10, 12 years ago, Dr. Lipkin and I screened it for Anthony Fauci, who then, as now, will have the same job. And he loved the movie and said, the science is accurate and the things you contemplated are really accurate. The only thing that I take issue with is we'd never come up with a vaccine that fast. And he recently reached out to Ian Lipkin and said, okay, you guys were right. We came up with a vaccine that fast. So look, I'm not clairvoyant. I wish I were. I would do better at things like cards and horse racing, but you didn't have to be. We've had pandemics throughout history. They've been a major driver of human history. It looks like they happen pretty much every 50 years. So, and they're going to happen more and more as we encroach more into wild spaces and come in contact with animals and micro, organisms that we never saw before, and reservoir species like bats. And we have more and more contact. And bats are a tricky thing because, they have they're mammals. So a thing that will work inside of a bat has a good chance of working inside of us. I think it's easy to point your finger at wet markets in Asia and Southeast Asia. But I'm always afraid when people do that, because my understanding is a lot of times those markets exist because people don't have refrigeration, and that culturally they buy animals live and take them home and slaughter them. And so we can condemn them very quickly because the cultural choices that they've made are different from us. I don't think that's the solve. There should be a way to make sure those markets are regulated, and that the day that someone is selling chickens, maybe you're not selling pigs. A pig is what all of the scientists I met with always called a mixing vessel, because a pig, frequently migratory birds will hang out in, these watering things at big factory farms, and a pig will get a disease from a bird, and then a pig again, a warm-blooded mammal like us, will sneeze on one of the, I forget, 3 or 4 million people on the planet who work with livestock, and those are the chains. So our virus wasn't a coronavirus, so I'm clearly not clairvoyant. It was based on another kind of virus. But I guess if I could go back, it would be to spend more time thinking about how a fractured society deals with a common problem.
I have several more questions, but I also don't want to take up too much of the time and monopolize it. So, Zach?
I think we're going to jump right to the clip. So we've got
Okay.
some meat to talk about here. So let's see if this share screen works. So this is maybe to set the scene. So this is a moment when the director of the CDC is giving an interview talk and is sort of pit against a blogger. And this is the scene from Contagion.
There are stories circulating on the internet that in India and elsewhere, the drug ribavirin has been shown to be effective against this virus. Yet, Homeland Security is telling the CDC not to make any announcements until stockpiles of the drug can be secured.
Well, Dr. Gupta, there continue to be evaluations of several drugs. Ribavirin is among them. But right now, our best defense has been social distancing. No handshaking, staying home when you're sick, washing your hands frequently.
Can you tell us to date how many people have died from this virus?
Very difficult. We're still working on confirming that number. There are 50 different states in this country, which means there are 50 different health departments, followed by 50 different protocols.
Let me bring in Alan Crumwoody into this debate as well. Alan's a freelance journalist. He was the first to track the Shinko Busman video. Alan, today on Twitter, you wrote that the truth about this virus is being kept from the world by the CDC, by the World Health Organization, to allow friends of the current administration to benefit from it, both financially and physically.
There are therapies we know are effective right now, like forsythia, and they don't even appear on the CDC website.
On your blog, you also wrote that the World Health Organization is somehow in bed with pharmaceutical companies.
Because they are. That's who stands to gain from this. They're working hand in glove. And the hand is reaching into our pockets.
The CDC is exploring forsythia and other homeopathic treatments, but right now, there's no science to back any of these claims.
Or no way Dr. Cheever or the people who put him into power can profit from it.
We're not ruling anything out. There are people who are sick, people who are dying, and we
They're not keeping us safe from this any more than they kept us safe
about the
from Wall
health
Street
of
or Katrina. Dr. Cheever is being a bit disingenuous when he says every American citizen.
We're working very hard to find out where this virus came from, to treat it and to vaccinate against it if we can. We don't know all of that yet. We just don't know. What we do know is that in order to become sick, you have to first come in contact with a sick person or something that they touched. In order to get scared, all you have to do is come in contact with a rumor or the television or the internet. I think what Mr. Crumwoody is spreading is far more dangerous than the disease.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yes.
That's funny.
What's funny?
No, I think you're funny. Because if you check on Facebook, you'll find a communique attributed to Dr. Cheever by Elizabeth Nygaard about the quarantine of Chicago, hours before it was announced to the public. That's why I think he's a bit disingenuous when he says equal care for all and not just his friends.
Some pretty wild allegations here, Dr. Cheever. I mean, can you tell us what communication appeared and when? What exactly is the nature of your relationship with Elizabeth Nygaard?
Well, again, I'm not aware of anything attributed to me on any social
I'm sure you're not.
Facebook,
It is
Twitter.
there. It is there. Tell them what an Arnold of 2 really means, Dr. Cheever. Teach them some math. No? I'll do it. On day 1, there were 2 people with it, and then there were 4, and then it was 16. And you think you've got it in front of you. But next it's 256, and then it's 65,000, and it's behind you and above you and all around you. In 30 steps, it's 1 billion sick. 3 months. It's a math problem you can do on a napkin. And that's where we're headed. And that's why you won't even tell us the number of the dead, will you, Dr. Cheever? But you'll tell your friends when to get out of Chicago before anyone else has a chance.
What I think is really great about this clip is that it shows just how interested the movie is in tracking the spread of information and misinformation, almost as much as it is interested in tracking the spread of the virus. So my question is, maybe generally, what's the purpose of adding the Alan Crumwoody storyline, the Jude Law character, And are we as an audience ever supposed to kind of side with him at any point?
Yeah, I mean, my hope was that people would be able to identify him. I mean, what I wanted to do with that character is have some of the things that he says be right, and some of them be, misinformation. And I think that, is a part of the movie that I'm proud of, because I think we got it pretty spot on, 12 years ago, before the internet was as powerful as it is now. And what the tagline of the movie ended up being from Warner Brothers was "Nothing spreads like fear," and that to me was really an important thing that I learned, and I hope I helped a lot of the medical people learn, was that in their little bubbles, they tend to have ignored how powerful social media is and how misinformation can spread and put us all in danger.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it reminds me how you said your parents were psychologists, and I mean, Contagion's often lauded for its like accuracy in the portrayal of medical science, but something that's often kind of overlooked in a lot of the conversations is the sort of psychology of the people receiving those facts. And you kind of touched on it, but I kind of want you to go into a little more about what's the role of sort of psychology in Contagion, and you can open it up and maybe think about psychology in a bunch of different films that you've made. Seem sort of interested in that.
That's a really good question, and actually one I've never been asked, which is fun for me. I think the problem is we're all wired differently. We all have different experiences. We all bring to a crisis like this our politics, our religion, our own experiences. And, the Crumwitty character ends up actually doing what he accuses other people of doing, which is profiteering. And we saw that, with COVID. We saw early claims of, hydroxychloroquine and other things that really, once science was applied to them, ended up not being effective. And there were other homeopathic cures that I'm sure everybody here saw appear on their feeds of things that you can do that will, keep you safe. And so, that's, to me, psychologically, that's sort of the story of human history. And that when we're scared, we gravitate towards things that we think are going to make us feel better. And, knowing that about ourselves, it makes it really hard to arm people with facts. Right now I'm very involved in working on addressing vaccine hesitancy, which is going to be a huge problem, because we're not going to get beyond this if people don't get vaccinated. And, I just came back from New York, where I filmed a bunch of PSAs about this. And it's interesting because if you come from a community that has not been well served by medicine in this country, it's very understandable why you would doubt the vaccine. And so you really, when you enter that conversation, the scientists who I know go right in with the science. And I'm like, you're a white guy, that's what you are. You're a white guy, and you got to check your privilege, because somebody who lives in a community that has a different life expectancy, has had a different interaction with medicine, a different interaction with authority, is going to have arrived at a different set of conclusions. And you can't just say to them, no, you're wrong. All of your experiences are wrong. Take the vaccine. You need to sort of start from a place of empathy and go, yeah, you know what? You're right. We did experiments on African Americans, and it is very reasonable for you to be concerned. So who would you like to speak to? Who could give you peace of mind with this idea?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's sort of, that's perfect segue to the question I wanted to ask, actually, about the report and Laundromat. And so these are two films where when I watch them, I think they're largely about whistleblowers and the kind of tension around when to bring something that's hidden to the public or make it visible to the public. And so, I mean, one question I have is, what do you see as the role of movies in sort of raising public awareness? And do you think they work differently than the type of whistleblower journalism that you make movies about?
Well, look, we live in a society, rightly or wrongly, that, that idolizes celebrity. And so if you can get Adam Driver to tell a story or embody a character, it's probably going to be more compelling to people than, than Daniel Jones. God bless him. And so, there's that part of it. There's, the fact that you get to photograph it, and cinema is a very powerful thing. In The Informant, for those who are there who are film students, if you go back and watch the movie, there's not a single close-up in the film until Matt finally says, I think I need to go back to the hospital. And Stephen and I spoke about that, the entire time we were shooting, because the studio kept going, why are there no close-ups? Why are there no close-ups? And Stephen said, and TV abuses the close-up all the time, but Stephen said, I want to save it so it has impact. And, that's, so there's a lot in the way a film is photographed and the way it's scored that journalism can't really provide, because you don't have the same control. There also is an opportunity, inevitably, to editorialize in a film the way you are not supposed to as a journalist. And that's tricky, because I feel like, when I make a film, there's the experience I have when I learn the material. Then there's the experience when I try and turn the material into entertainment. Then there's the experience of going and filming the thing that I made, which means collaborating with a bunch of other people who may not get what I was trying to do, or I may not have a budget to actually accomplish what I wanted to do. So, I always talk to people about, I feel like I make 3 movies. There's the one in my mind, there's the one that I go out and shoot with my collaborators, and then there's the one that everybody else tells you made, that you then have to get, involved in conversations about, which can be painful, but, can also be a really great learning experience, because sometimes you find that you connect with people, and that feels really lovely as an artist. And sometimes you feel like, wow, we're all trapped in our bubbles and some people just aren't going to hear it. I mean, it was very gratifying to go around the world with the report and find so many military people who would come up to me after screenings and say, thank you for making this film. This is not what America was supposed to be.
I mean, your answer sort of makes me think about kind of the collaboration in Hollywood and sort of how that may work now. So like COVID has had clearly an immediate impact on the movie industry. I mean, production's either halted or sort of on and off based on test results. But how do you see COVID kind of changing Hollywood in the long run?
It's interesting that you talk about that. Like, Soderbergh and I have been working with the Directors Guild, and we created a document called The Way Forward, which is now, I think, industry standard for how to shoot during this time. And we worked with a lot of the scientists we worked with on the film. And Stephen just shot a movie in Detroit and didn't have a single positive test on set. And so I know that our protocols can work. The tricky part isn't what happens to people at work. The tricky part is what happens to them at home. And all of our scientists and modelers said, yeah, I can tell you you'll be 98% safe at work. But like, what do you do with the PA who's in charge of lockup, who, like wants to go out and have a life because they're 21 and they're a film student in college, and yeah, they want to work on your set, but they also want to do the things we all want to do when we're 21.
Yeah. Well, I think I should, I'll end it here so we can hear what the audience has to ask. So Andre, I'm going to kick it back to you, and then would you mind fielding some of the audience questions?
Absolutely. So I think this first one you did touch on somewhat, but Jacob asks, as an aspiring screenwriter, how do I balance trying to write something commercially viable to get my work read and still be scientifically accurate in my storytelling? And I'll just add on to that. Does it take, is this not script one, or does this happen later? Are you able to do more of this later on?
I hope that I've gotten better at it, whatever Malcolm Gladwell says about 10,000 hours. So I think the more you do it, the more you understand. But, I guess my rule is don't bend the rules of science to make your story work. Find a story that works because of the rules of science, and then you'll just draw from your passion for what you're trying to say.
All right, thank you. So this next one from Ginny. So this reminds me about Contagion and the report. Can you speak about maintaining victim dignity when portraying disasters?
Wow, that's a really good question. That's a thing that really happens both on the page and being compassionate, but it also, as a director, is something on set. I'll tell you, when it came time to shoot the torture scenes for the report, everybody on our set was really uncomfortable, and we made sure that if Abu Zubaydah was a Lebanese man, that we cast a Lebanese actor. I did not want to fall into he's Middle Eastern, so any Middle Eastern guy. So we wanted to be respectful. And I said to the actor, if you're ever uncomfortable on set, this is horrible for us to sit and watch, a crew of, largely white and Black people, looking at this. And he said, no, it's really important to me that you do what was done, because that's what I owe my community. And when you cast the right people and you set up the right vibe, then you provide them with dignity.
Okay, thank you. So this one's about an inconvenient truth from Saskia. Thanks to an inconvenient truth, climate change as an anthropogenic issue made it into a lot of people's radars, and yet the US has done little to nothing to tackle this crisis. What kind of storytelling or messaging is most effective in affecting change? And does the doomsday narrative serve the issue or hurt it?
Really great question. So I'm actually doing a show right now, a scripted show that I'm doing with Apple that goes into production hopefully in a couple of months in Vancouver. But it's a show that looks at climate change over the next, 60 or 70 years, which are really going to be, look, I don't think we're all going to die. So I don't really subscribe to the doomsday narrative. What I do subscribe to is the fact that human beings tend to change too late. And that the question to me is, as we blow by tipping point after tipping point, what kind of world do we want to live in? How many climate refugees? How many animals do we want to watch go extinct? How many years of forest fires until we, come up with different policies? And so the show, which is called Extrapolations, is going to really take a look at this very question. And here's my conclusion on this, and I love your question, is, when I go into Apple, they'll always say to me, well, your show has to be hopeful. And I get really angry, because hope to me is, and we can have a longer discussion about hope and religion, but to me, hope is this thing that you can't have without a strategy. And so I always say to people, you give me a strategy and I'll tell you if I'm hopeful about the prospect of it working. But just walking around hopeful isn't going to do anything. What is meaningful is creating characters in these stories that have dignity and that have integrity and that are going to do the right thing, whether or not it works. And that's really what we need right now, both in the storytelling and in the making of public policy about this issue. You need people who will put aside their partisan bullshit, the whoever's paying them, whatever Coke money they're getting, wherever, they're being sponsored as politicians, and go, long term, what is going to make for a healthy, prosperous, world.
Okay, thank you. So this is from Rob. I always think about the Howard Hawks quote in relation to your movies, that a good movie is, quote, 3 great scenes and no bad scenes. I can think of so many great scenes, such great scenes in your movies. Do you have specific scenes in mind before you start writing a screenplay, or are they, pleasant surprises in the writing process?
You guys are asking really great questions. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. You just totally made my day. Here's what I do, and I think it's a good technique. I keep doing research until a scene happens. And that's when I know I'm ready to start writing a movie. And when I don't know what a scene is, the next scene is, what I will always do is just go back to research. So for me, it just is always, that's completely my process. Is there's research and research and research, and then I'll hear something and I'm like, oh, that would be a cool scene. And I go and I write that scene. And that's how it works. Sometime I'll give you a list of bad scenes in films I've written and how I wish I could have done better. There's a lot of ways for it to go wrong. Sometimes it's the writing, sometimes it's the acting, the directing. I'm always amazed at something that I really thought was going to work and then falls apart. And conversely, there's a scene that I was terrified about in Contagion where Kate Winslet explains what an Arnaud is. And I'm stunned that every time I've done, a talk show or something, people always pull that scene. And Kate and I spent so much time going over that scene because she was like, I'm an actress, not a scientist. This is going to sound fake. I don't understand any of this. Can you get rid of that word? And I was sure it wasn't going to work, but evidently it does. So you never know. That's the great thing about film is, you can be saved by an actor and, killed by a bad camera angle.
Well, I was actually going to ask a question about casting, since, especially with your collaborative relationship with Steven Soderbergh, do you ever find yourself writing for an actor or revisiting the script after principal casting has been completed?
The only actor I've ever written for was Matt Damon, both on Bourne and, I'd worked a little bit, I actually wrote a little bit of Ocean's 12. And so Matt knew me and Matt worked around a little bit. And so Matt, I knew Matt was going to be an informant, so I wrote it for him. But that's really the only time I've written for an act. Oh, there's one other time. Well, no, this isn't really me writing for someone, but the first person to read The Laundromat was Meryl Streep. And Stephen sent me a text saying, a very fancy actress really loved your writing. And I was like, a clue? And he was like, MS. And I was like, holy shit, really? So I don't know if I was writing for her, but once I knew that she was going to be in the movie, then I kind of went back and was like, be fun to, yeah. And by the way, she's extraordinary. I mean, that sounds like a stupid thing to say because she's Meryl Streep, but she did that movie because she really cares about that issue.
Excellent. So Alex asks, what effects can viewing scientifically based works of fiction have on the way people process and react to scientific communication in times of crisis?
I wish Richard Dawkins was here to answer that question. That's a thing that I've actually had the opportunity to discuss with Richard Dawkins, and that I wish we lived in a world where we could connect with the beauty of nature in the way that sometimes we connect with things that are more supernatural in other religious contexts. Because I think the beauty of the world, of space, of the oceans, these things have great and obviously they're where poetry came from. And so I think doubling down on what is profound and beautiful and moving in nature, and turning it into art is something we should all, as writers, think about. There's a great book on this by an Indian writer named Amitav Ghosh called The Great Derangement, where he really takes on the question of, like, why did science fiction become sort of, scoffed at by serious literature? And when you think back to Jules Verne and Orwell and, going up even to modern times now with people like William Gibson, there are great sci-fi writers that in another time with other bookstores would have been some of our most important, kind of commentaries on our society. And by sort of ghettoizing speculative fiction, we've done a great disservice to ourselves as artists.
I think that's a great answer to end on, actually. So if everyone could just, from where you are, anywhere in the world, just give a round of applause to Scott for being with us today, that would be great.
Thank you. You guys were great. These were like some of the best questions I've ever had. So this was a pleasure for me. I learned a lot.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.